Two veterans around the Ohio Statehouse are retiring after more than 3 decades of serving the state's low-income and at-risk residents. Lisa Hamler-Fugitt has advocated for Ohioans who rely on the state's food banks, most recently at the Ohio Association of Foodbanks, where she has served as executive director for more than 20 years. She's worked with 5 different governors and 14 General Assemblies to create public-private partnerships that benefit Ohioans who are at risk of going hungry. She stepped down from that role at the end of July to serve as Director Emeritus, and she will be leaving that role when she officially retires at the end of this year. John Corlett also plans to retire as President and Executive Director of the Center for Community Solutions at the end of this year. He worked at that organization for 18 years, and before that, he was the former Medicaid Director for the state of Ohio and the Vice President of Government Relations and Community Affairs for the MetroHealth System in Cleveland. He spent 41 years in Ohio's nonprofit and government affairs service. Both are leaving big shoes to fill. I asked them about leaving at a time when political headwinds are uncertain.
I have to tell you, Joe, I think it's time for new people, new blood, new energy, and maybe a new way of thinking and acting. Certainly, we've seen a lot of changes around Capitol Square, and it's for those of us that have been around through multiple administrations. For me, it's been 5, and some 14 different General Assemblies. I really think it's time to step aside and let our young, youthful leaders lead our organizations.
John, what about you?
Yeah, I think the same thing. The other thing is, both Lisa and I think, have, over those, we both worked through the same number of administrations, have always sort of partnered really well with whomever's here. Like, that's the thing. I think about like all the Republicans I've worked with over the years. I mean, I think about people like Bob Netzley, Joan Lawrence, Merle Kearns, all those people. We've always worked so well with them, and I think that's what we figured out how to do is how to thread that needle and get stuff done that'll benefit the citizens of Ohio.
You've both had to deal with a lot of challenges through the years. So let me ask you, John, let you start. What was your greatest challenge?
I think the greatest challenge was when I was working at MetroHealth. It was after I had stepped down as state Medicaid director. And we came up with this idea to expand Medicaid a year early in Cuyahoga County through a Medicaid waiver. So first I had to go to the Medicaid agency, first I had to go to my county government and get them to say, okay. And then I had to go to the state Medicaid director, John McCarthy, and he said okay, and the governor's office said okay. Then we had to go to the Obama administration, they had to say okay, and all those things happened. And the result was that 38,000 people got health care coverage in Cuyahoga County a year earlier. And I think we also showed the state that it was possible to expand in a responsible way because we were under budget and covered more people than we expected. So I think that was both the biggest challenge I think I faced, but also for me it's one of the things I'm proudest of.
Lisa, what about you? What's your greatest challenge?
Making programs work for people, reaching them where they work, live, play, and pray, and to be able to take really complicated programs and get relatively inexperienced legislators to understand the role of these programs and how they work. I'm with John. The fact that we were able to expand Medicaid in the state, and I think we thought 275,000 people would gain access, but what we saw is it was so much bigger than that. And then leading an organization that served not once, but now is in our 2nd term of the state's lead navigator to the Affordable Care Act, connecting people to a healthcare home and hopefully on a path to wellness. My other is being able to work with Ohio farmers, growers, and commodity producers in creating and expanding the Ohio Food Program and Agriculture Clearance Program that started under the Voinovich administration. Those 2 key nutrition programs now provide 1 out of every 4 meals that our food banks distribute. And it's just critically important to us being able to do the work that we do.
Right.
I mean, I just, I think that was just genius, Lisa, on your part, that you sort of brought the farmers of Ohio together with people, mainly some of our cities and rural areas, who needed access to that food, and nobody had done that before, and you really thought that up.
Well, thank you, John. And John has served on our Cleveland Food Bank board for a couple of terms now and has led the leadership. But Ohio is an agricultural state, and to be able to make those linkages and to bring farmers and growers and commodity producers to the State House to lobby side by side with us, that it's hard for somebody to say, I really don't like your social programs, but I really do like those farmers.
Yeah,
so
yep.
It's a great public-private partnership. But the other thing, Joe, is that we are very fortunate in the state of Ohio to have very dedicated public servants that work within our state agencies. And I think through my years of being able to partner with multiple state agencies, but to really get to know the state employees who come to every day to work and work really hard for the betterment of the citizens of the state of Ohio. And we're blessed for that.
Mm-hmm. Was there ever a time when either one of you had challenges that you just couldn't see your way through? You didn't know how you were going to deal with them? Lisa, I'm sure you probably did, right?
Yeah, and I think leaving now, that's probably continues to be one of my biggest disappointments, is that we failed even when the state of Ohio had very strong balances, as we do now, that we have failed to enact a refundable state earned income tax credit to make work pay for the 1 in 3 Ohio families who work every day but just don't earn enough to be able to meet their basic needs. And we have tried and seen legislation enacted, and a small expansion, I think, under the Kasich administration. But as I said to him, refundability is important. It's a bag of groceries. So that, I think, is a challenge. But again, it's about education. It's continuing to educate our elected leaders to understand that public policy can really move and bring about tremendous change, including a reduction in poverty.
Mm-hmm. What about you, John?
I think for me, the piece that I've been sort of most worried about over the last several years has been the growth in poverty among older adults in the state. I mean, child poverty has actually come down since Lisa and I started this work, and that's a good thing. But poverty among older adults is rising, and I think, as pensions have disappeared and sort of retirement savings have kind of disappeared, that's the group that I'm most worried about. And because we're an older state too, we tend to be older than other states, and so I think that's an area where we need probably renewed focus, is on older adults and trying to sort of improve their economic security.
So on the flip side, what do you think has been your greatest success, John?
Well, I mentioned, working on the Medicaid expansion. I think, my greatest success has actually been the ability to work with so many advocates over these past 40 years and watch people sort of grow into amazing leaders to sort of take organizations and tackle issues. I think about a lot of people that I've, worked with who've gone on to make a lot of differences, for the people of Ohio and across the country too. So I think that's, for me, is sort of bringing that next generation along of advocates and teaching them and coaching them and encouraging them and encouraging people not to get discouraged. And I think the other thing is also, I think sometimes it's real easy to judge somebody because of the letter after their name. And I think that is my greatest learning, is that you can't do that, because, I think I would not have predicted, for example, that Governor Kasich would have expanded Medicaid, but he did it, and he became a champion for it. And I don't think it would have happened without him, without his leadership. And so, I think we have to sort of, take people at face value and trust their intentions and go from there.
Lisa, what about you?
I'm with John. I mean, right now I am really worried about the grain of our state, a lack of comprehensive services that we're seeing that are going to allow the greatest generation to age with a little bit of dignity in their own homes instead of nursing homes. I think this idea is that there's only a one-size-fits-all approach, maybe. Being able to take full advantage of federal as well as state opportunities to expand programs, and I really would like to see a revisiting of term limits. I think that term limits have been to the detriment of the state of Ohio, and that legislators, and by the time they've served 8 years, they really understand how things work, and we end up losing them. So I long for the days of people like Representative Bob Netzley, who was the king of the Caveman Caucus, who served on the Welfare Reform Oversight Committee, and went out and really investigated how things were done.
And he did that with State Representative Barbara Boyd from Cleveland Heights. So very, unlikely sort of workmates, because their ideologies were separate, but they were both interested in a better program, I think.
And better outcomes for the citizens of the state of Ohio.
Yeah.
Because ultimately that's who is going to lead us into the future. It is the future workforce. It's the future leadership.
Yeah. Is there something that you're leaving unfinished that you wish you could have finished, Lisa?
Boy, that's tough. Maybe a more durable disaster response, and I think learning on the fly out of COVID, that we have to bring the whole of government to respond. I think we set a real trend in leadership, but we need to build the redundancy. It's not if, but it's when the next disaster comes. And I want to make sure that we're hardened off and we have those assets. And certainly that's something that we're focused on. The changes with climate change, the adaptability that we have to be prepared for. So I would say that that's one, including the term limits, and I'd like to see a revisiting of the state minimum wage, which we worked on in 2006 as well. So ensuring that no Ohioan is left behind.
Mm-hmm. What about you, John?
The one thing I've been really interested in lately, because it's a new opportunity at the federal level, is using Medicaid to improve healthcare services for people who are leaving correctional facilities. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that if we do a better job, particularly with people with behavioral health and substance use disorders, and getting them health care, we can keep them out of these places in the first place. And so it's both sort of a crime reduction sort of initiative and a health improvement initiative as well, and really would help address some of the equity issues that I think we face in our state prisons. But it's a new opportunity, and it's sort of like, oh, I want to work on that, but someone else is going to have to do that. So
yeah,
you're the king of the 11-15 labors, right?
Well, I think you've kind of alluded to this, but both of you have had to work with various governors and lawmakers on different sides of the aisle, and maybe some of them you can't even guess what side of the aisle they're on. How do you balance all that? How did you do that, John?
I've always said that, I never want to surprise anybody. If we're going to be critical of somebody, they're going to know it ahead of time. They're not going to hear it on this program first or read about it in the newspaper first. We're going to talk to them first and let them know how we feel. And then also see if we have something wrong, because we don't always get it right. And so it's good to know if there's mitigating factors. I think I have a lot more patience, having served as state Medicaid director. I know how difficult it is to get things done, to actually get things finished in government. And so I'm much more patient about that, and much more open to hearing, the explanations of our state, employees, the folks who help keep this place running.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Lisa?
It's about relationships. It's getting to know them as people, getting to know their families, their interest, always providing an opportunity to meet, have them come out, meet with our members, the people that are in our food lines. We all want to be on the winning team and to make it as a win-win situation. I have been so blessed and honored to work with really great leaders and also their staffs who really have a good grasp of the issues and are always willing to roll up their sleeves. And again, I would say that the COVID response that Governor DeWine did, he was the first governor to deploy the Ohio National Guard that allowed us to continue to feed literally millions of Ohioans as they lost their job through no fault of their own. And that was because he saw the threat out there and didn't waver. And that's what leaders do. They lead.
Do you have any fun, kind of lighthearted, inspiring stories about bipartisanship or about people you've worked with through the years here?
Well, I think it's interesting, Joe, that when I stepped down as state Medicaid director, I got 2 letters of thanks. one from Bill Batchelder and the other from Bill Seitz. And not people that I was sort of ideologically matched up with or whatever, but it really, I mean, I saved them because I was like, well, I might not get these again. I just enjoyed working with people down here. I have a lot of respect for people, these folks who serve in this legislature and this administration, because no matter their party or their beliefs, they're public servants. And when I became Medicaid director, I finally understood what public service was, and I believe in it. And it's just, they're a lot of fun to hang out with too, so.
Yeah, I think one of my fondest memories, we talked about Bob Netzley, who served for some 40 years. I think he was on his second or third hip replacement when he took us out in welfare reform, and we visited some 20 counties. But as he was closing up his office, he asked me to come over and handed me the first bill that he had ever introduced around family planning.
Oh, right.
And I'll never forget that, because he said, this is about people being able to make informed decisions for themselves and their families. And again, talk about the opposite sides of the spectrum. But again, that's an example. I think packing hearing rooms around controversial bills and having members really understand that this is the power of the people. So again, it's been interesting. I would certainly say that we could have more of that bipartisanship if legislators were able to grow into the positions and get to know one another. Mm-hmm. I think we're fortunate that we see them come and we see them go, and a lot of times it's just really sad because we lose the really great ones who understand the programs.
Yep.
Yeah. Is there any situation that sticks with you and you think, man, I wish I would have done that just a little differently? Something that if you could turn back the hands of time, you'd do differently, maybe.
I guess I would maybe go back to what I referenced before, Joe, is that, I think, when I was younger and doing this work, I tended to pay more attention to those letters behind people's names, and sort of thought, well, I only talk to the Democrats or I only talk to the Republicans or whatever. And it took a while to sort of kind of shake that. And I don't feel that way anymore. And so I think that's probably the one thing I wish, I had maybe when I was started doing this work, maybe I'd been a little bit more open-minded about, other people's sort of views, because neither side has sort of the hold on good ideas. All sides have good ideas, and so I don't think I was as open to that when I started this.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a really good one. It's difficult to say if there's any one thing. I mean, I think being able to thank somebody who you don't agree with, who has opposed your position or who has tried to advance some really destructive legislation, to be able to go back in, knowing full well that the fight goes on, but to have respect. That is the most important thing. When we lose respect for the institution, the process, I think with age comes patience, I guess. Yeah.
The other thing I just thought of, Joe, too, is one thing I should have done differently. Back during the Taft administration, we planned a rally here at the Statehouse around the budget. And I told the people in Cleveland, I said, we will pay, the Center for Community Solutions will pay for any bus that you can fill. Well, 20 buses later and $20,000, I was like, I will never make that offer again to pay for any bus, all the buses that somebody could fill, because I learned from that when you give that to people, they're going to take it and run with it. So it was a good thing that all those folks came to Columbus, but it was also expensive.
Both say they plan to continue to serve in volunteer roles once they retire. We here at the Statehouse News Bureau wish them the very best in their next chapter.